I've always had a goal to hit 1,000 likes on a video, but you legends smashed past that and got one of my videos to over 2K likes. Let's break even more records on this video. Please smash that like button. And I want to try this one thing. I want to know who my devoted listeners are. So once you've done that, comment down below that you hit that like button hard, or even a kind message. Let's see who our loyal devoted viewers are. You know who you are. Once again, thank you guys so much. Now to these amazing stories.
Oh man, I used to think dinner dates at someone's house were kind of a green flag. Like, if they're willing to cook, set the table, and clean their place, that's gotta be a good sign, right? Shows effort, shows confidence, shows they know how to use an oven. That's what I thought anyway. Then I went to Amber's place. We met through a mutual friend who swore she was super cool and really grounded, which now feels like foreshadowing for how wildly off the ground this night ended up being. We texted for about 2 weeks before she invited me over for dinner. Nothing fancy, she said, just pasta and wine and some conversation. That sounded perfect. I even stopped by a bakery on the way to grab dessert because I wanted to come off thoughtful, but not like I was trying too hard. I went with those mini fruit tarts that look cute but taste like absolutely nothing. Amber's place was this tall, skinny townhouse that looked like it was once part of a normal duplex, but had been sliced into individual units by someone with a chainsaw and no permits. I knocked, and she answered in this apron covered in cartoon dinosaurs, which I'll admit made me immediately less nervous. She was funny, quick with a sarcastic joke, and had that dry delivery that made everything sound like a bit. She handed me a glass of red wine and told me to make myself at home while she finished cooking. The kitchen was small, kind of tucked between the hallway and the living room, but there were candles on the table and some indie band I didn't recognize playing from a Bluetooth speaker. It smelled amazing: garlic, butter, herbs. She had already plated everything when she sat down, and we clinked glasses like we were in some awkward commercial. I genuinely thought it was going well. We talked about TV shows, weird side jobs we had in high school, and I even started to relax a bit. And then it happened. Midway through the meal, she suddenly paused, like something just clicked in her brain. She put her fork down slowly and looked up at me with this deadpan expression, like she was trying to decide how much to say. Then she just casually said she still lived with her ex. Not like, he's moving out tomorrow or he crashes here sometimes. Nope. He lived there. Full time. Upstairs. Sleeping, showering, eating cereal, existing. And to make things worse, she said he was probably listening through the vent right now. I genuinely thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. She pointed at the ceiling and said there's a vent in the hallway that connects to the upstairs bedroom. Apparently, he gets bored and sometimes tunes into her conversations. I sat there frozen, fork midair, trying to decide if I was being punked or if I was somehow on a hidden camera prank show that had a budget of zero and no legal team. I asked her why she would invite me over for dinner if her ex literally lived there, and she just shrugged and said they're still on good terms, and the lease is too expensive to break. She said it all like it was a normal inconvenience, like, oh yeah, the sink leaks sometimes or our Wi-Fi is spotty in the back room. Except this wasn't a leaky faucet or slow internet. This was a whole grown man, probably crouched upstairs near an air vent, eavesdropping on my attempts to compliment her pasta without sounding too thirsty. From then on, I couldn't even focus. Every creak from the ceiling felt like he was moving closer. I imagined him lying on the floor, face to the vent, eating popcorn. At one point, I swear I heard a cough. It might have been my own anxiety echoing, but it definitely made me drop my fork. She didn't seem remotely concerned. She even offered to let me meet him real quick before I left, like I was supposed to shake the guy's hand and say, "Hey man, thanks for letting me borrow your ex for an hour." I said I needed to get up early the next day and started putting on my jacket mid-sentence. She followed me to the door and thanked me for coming, asked if I wanted to hang out again next week, and said she was thinking of making lasagna. I walked to my car faster than I ever have in my life. I kept expecting the guy to open a window and shout something, or worse, follow me down the steps. I didn't look up once. I still had half a glass of wine in my hand when I realized I left the fruit tarts on her counter. Later, I texted my friend, the one who introduced us, and told them what happened. It just said, oh yeah, she mentioned that once. I thought she was joking. Like it was some cute little Amberism. Like, oh, she leaves the light on in the bathroom, or she still lives with her ex who spies through vents. She texted me 2 days later asking if I wanted to pick a wine and vibe again, and I just left it on read. I don't think she was trying to be weird, which somehow made it worse. She seemed to think this whole setup was totally acceptable. Now every time I hear a vent humming in someone's house, I get this weird urge to talk louder, like I'm performing for some invisible upstairs peanut gallery. I don't do home dates anymore. Not unless I've seen the full floor plan and confirmed there's no ex-boyfriend lurking behind the drywall. And I never got those fruit tarts back. Kind of still salty about that. So I got roped into this date with Bradley by complete accident. It started with this random DN from him saying he knew me from college, which wasn't technically wrong. We had a couple classes together, but never really talked. He was one of those guys who always had some opinion to share that somehow took twice as long as necessary and sounded like a TED talk that nobody asked for. But he was funny in messages I was bored, and he asked if I wanted to be his date to a family dinner. Said it'd be chill, casual, no pressure. I asked him if this was like a holiday thing or a special event. He said it was just a regular family dinner, maybe celebrating a cousin's engagement. Emphasis on maybe. I should have seen the signs then. I wasn't expecting much, but I figured why not? Worst case, free food and an excuse to wear that dress that had been collecting dust in my closet. I showed up a few minutes late on purpose, just so I didn't end up sitting awkwardly in someone's living room while the parents tried to figure out if they were supposed to be nice to me or not. Bradley met me outside, wearing a button-down shirt that was clearly trying too hard. He looked nervous, but not in a cute way, more like he was rehearsing something in his head. We walked in, and his whole family was already seated around this long table like we'd walked into the final act of a play. His mom hugged me way too tight. His dad gave me this weird up-down stare like he was trying to figure out my credit score. And the cousin he mentioned, well, she had this freshly engaged glow that made it clear the whole dinner was centered around her. We sat down, and immediately I noticed Bradley kept calling me babe and doing this thing where he'd squeeze my hand under the table. I hadn't even eaten a breadstick, and already he was acting like we were 2 years deep into a relationship. I kept playing along just enough not to make it awkward, thinking maybe his family was the kind that grilled you about every guest, so he was overcompensating. 10 minutes in, his aunt asked how we met, and Bradley said, "We've been together for 6 months now," which was wild considering we had spoken maybe 4 times before this dinner. I choked on my water, and everyone laughed like I was just bashful or something. His cousin, let's call her Erica, smiled at me in that passive way, like she was already measuring me up against an imaginary scoreboard. You could tell she thought she was the center of the universe, and honestly, at that point, she kind of was. Dinner went on. People started clinking glasses, giving toasts, bragging about their kids. The whole vibe was this mix of fake support and low-key competition, the way families get when they see each other like twice a year but want to prove they've got their lives figured out. Bradley was quiet for a while, then started drinking his wine a little faster, like he was building up to something. I just assumed he was nervous around his family, until he stood up. He tapped his glass with his knife, yeah, like people do in movies when they're about to propose. At first, I thought maybe he was gonna give some dumb toast about how happy he was for Erica and her fiancé, but then he turned toward me, reached into his jacket pocket, and pulled out a ring box. I swear my soul left my body. He opened it. There was a ring inside, not a cheap candy ring or a joke one, a legit ring. And then he got down on one knee. Everyone gasped. His mom teared up instantly. His aunt screamed. Erica looked like she'd just been slapped with a wedding cake. I was just sitting there with my mouth open, hands frozen, praying for an earthquake or a blackout or literally anything that would get me out of there. Then he said, "I know it's sudden, but when you know, Dio. Will you marry me?" I said, "What?" like 5 times in a row, looking around like maybe someone else would jump in and say it was a joke. But no, he just kept kneeling there, smiling like this was the most romantic thing in the world. I looked around. Everyone was waiting for me to say yes. Erica looked furious. Her fiancé looked like he was trying not to laugh. It was chaos, and I had no idea what was happening. I stood up, trying to get Bradley to do the same, whispering at him to cut it out, and that's when he burst out laughing. Loud, full-body laugh. He stood up and yelled, "Gotcha," and then said something like, "Just even the score with Erica. She thinks she's the queen of the family now. Had to take her down a peg." I couldn't even move. I wasn't sure who looked more confused, to me or his grandma. Turns out this was a whole setup. He planned it for weeks, ever since his cousin got engaged before him. He told his family we'd been dating for half a year, invited me under fake pretenses, and even bought a ring just for the joke. The worst part was, some of them actually thought it was funny. His uncle high-fived him. His dad laughed and said, "Classic Brad." Meanwhile, I was standing there like a prop that had just malfunctioned on stage. I left before dessert. Didn't even bother with an excuse, just grabbed my bag and walked out while people were still arguing over whether it was too far or not. Bradley texted me that night saying I played the part perfectly, and that I should have seen Erica's face, legendary. He even offered to take me out for real sometime. Blocked him. And that dress, never wore it again. It still sits in the back of my closet, smelling like red wine and betrayal. This one started at a bookstore of all places. I was in the self-help section looking for a book I wasn't going to finish when Janet approached me and said she liked my shirt. It wasn't even a cool shirt, just plain gray. But we talked for a bit, and she was quick with compliments, had this super confident energy like she was the main character in every room she entered. She asked for my number and I gave it to her because, honestly, why not? She seemed a little extra, but in that harmless way that makes people fun to hang out with. We texted for a few days and she suggested we grab lunch on Saturday. She picked this trendy cafe that only served food with names like the Enlightened Bowl and Vibrant Earth Salad. I showed up in jeans and a hoodie. She showed up looking like she was about to go live on Instagram. Hair done, ring light ready makeup, heels that clacked with purpose. Not gonna lie, I felt underdressed immediately. But she smiled, gave me this big hug, and we sat down. The waiter came over and she immediately handed him a little pink packet. Like, before he even said hello, said it was a sample and winked at him. I thought maybe she was trying to flirt, but then she did the same thing to the lady sitting 2 tables over who made the mistake of making eye contact. I had no clue what was going on. Once we ordered, she pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to me like we were closing a house or something. She said she just wanted to share an opportunity with me before we got too invested in anything. I opened it, and it was all these printed sheets with phrases like "be your own boss" and "financial freedom is just 3 connections away." That's when it hit me. She was in one of those multi-level marketing things. The folder had her name printed on a fake certificate and a list of ranks she was trying to hit. I'm not kidding, one of them was called Diamond Whisperer. She said she was already halfway to Sapphire level and just needed 3 more business partners to join her team. I hadn't even finished my iced tea, and she was already telling me how much money I could make working from my phone. At this point, I was trying to play it cool because, we're still in a public place. But then she pulled out her phone and said we should do a quick team video. I thought she meant a selfie or something. Nope. She opened TikTok and started filming. She pointed the camera at both of us and went, "Hey everyone, just here with one of my newest team members. Say hi." And like a deer caught in the middle of a math test, I just sat there blinking while she kept going, talking about how we were building our empires and living the boss life, and how I was already off to a powerful start. After she stopped recording, I told her I wasn't really into sales or marketing, and she immediately switched into this weird coach mode. She leaned in, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "That's just your fear talking. You gotta stop living small." I blinked again, hoping maybe I had hallucinated the last 10 minutes. Then she reached into her tote bag, huge pink thing that looked like it could hold a tent, and started pulling out little jars and bottles like a magician. Stuff labeled with things like youth nectar and sleep juice and liquid motivation. She handed them to me one by one, while explaining the miracle science behind each one. She said the waiter would probably love the sleep juice and tried to flag him down again to give him another sample. The poor guy just kept speed walking past us like he owed her money. I tried to redirect the conversation, like, "Hey, what music do you like? Do you have pets?" Normal date stuff. But every answer somehow circled back to the company. She said the CEO of her product family was like her second mom, and showed me screenshots of group chats where everyone called each other Boss Babe. She said her goal was to retire by 30 and travel full-time while building her legacy. Then she asked what I do for a living. I told her, and she made this face like I'd said I work in a meat grinder. She immediately launched into this speech about how jobs were just a trap and how the 9-to-5 life was literally designed to crush souls. She said she could get me out of the matrix if I just believed in myself enough. When the food came, she took pictures of it for like 5 full minutes before letting either of us eat. I was halfway through my sandwich when she suddenly told me to stop chewing. She pulled her phone out again and said she wanted to record a day-in-the-life video of us brainstorming business ideas. She angled the camera toward me and started filming again, pretending we were in the middle of a strategy session. I just smiled awkwardly and stared at the corner of the table while she talked about expansion goals and how team energy was so high today. I was apparently the team now. The final straw was when she started filling out a form for me to sign up under her. She said she already picked my username and everything. It was Glow with Jason. I said I had to use the bathroom and instead walked straight out of the cafe, deleted her number, and spent the next hour wandering around a bookstore again just to feel like a person again. I didn't even go home right away. I needed to detox from whatever that was. She DM'd me later saying she'd hoped I felt the energy between us and that she saw huge potential in me. Cool. I saw a pyramid with pink glitter on it and barely escaped with my bank account intact. I met Kaylin on this dating app that was trying really hard to be artsy. The kind with profile prompts like describe your soul in 3 words and people who take blurry photos of coffee cups and think it counts as personality. But whatever, his pictures weren't shirtless gym selfies and he didn't open with anything gross. So I gave him a shot. He had this vibe in his messages like he was constantly 2 sentences away from writing a song. Real into crystals, said the moon affected his mood, and his Spotify was all ambient noise and Scandinavian folk music. I wasn't sure if he was deep or just pretending to be, but I was curious enough to say yes when he asked if I wanted to hang out. His suggestion for the first date, let's do something different. I asked what he meant, and he said he wanted to show me his favorite place. That's all he'd tell me. Said it was a surprise and that it'd reveal a lot about who we are at our core. I thought we were maybe going to a lookout point or some weird thrift store or a late-night diner. What I did not expect was a cemetery. It was almost midnight when I pulled up. He told me to meet him near the back gate of this old cemetery on the edge of town. The kind of place you only ever see during Halloween or when someone dies in a movie. I didn't even know it was open or if we were allowed to be there. But he was already leaning against the fence when I got there, holding a flashlight like this was some ghost hunting expedition. He looked completely normal, which made it all way weirder. Jeans, hoodie, boots, casual, like we were going to a bonfire or something, not hanging out with the dead. I asked him what we were doing there, and he just said, "It's peaceful." They listen better than most people do. Then he handed me a second flashlight, opened the gate, and just walked in. Now, if I'd had even a sliver more self-respect that night, I probably would have turned around and gone home. But I didn't. I followed him. The place was dead silent, no pun intended. Just trees creaking, wind brushing through old tombstones, and every now and then a rustle that could have been a bird or a raccoon, or honestly, my will to live slipping out of my body. Kaylin walked like he'd been there 1,000 times. He pointed out graves that he said were his favorites. He even told me a little story about a guy named Franklin who probably had a gambling problem. After about 10 minutes of this weird graveyard tour, he sat down on the edge of a stone bench and patted the spot next to him. I sat because I was already deep in this terrible decision and might as well see where it was going. He started talking about how he used to come there a lot in high school to think. Said it helped him tune into the spiritual plane. I just nodded like that was a totally reasonable thing to say. Then it got worse. He told me that when he was 16, he used to break into the mausoleums. I laughed, thought he was kidding. He was not. He said he and his friend used to pick the locks, sneak in at night, and just sit in the middle of them. Sometimes they'd light candles or try to connect with whoever was resting there. He said it wasn't creepy, it was spiritual respect. Like breaking and entering was a form of tribute or something. At this point, I'm sitting next to a guy who just confessed to illegal grave tampering, trying to keep my face neutral while low-key planning my exit. He must have sensed I was uncomfortable, because then he said something like, "Don't worry, I don't do that anymore. I just listen now." And I wish I could say that was the weirdest part, but then he pulled out this tiny speaker from his jacket pocket and played this ambient music that sounded like a whale giving a TED talk underwater. He closed his eyes and said we should focus on the messages around us. I sat there while this dude meditated in a cemetery, whispering thank you into the dark like he was on a group call with the dead. Eventually, I stood up and said I needed to use the bathroom as an excuse to leave, even though clearly there were no bathrooms around. He opened one eye, nodded, and said, "The trees will guide you." I didn't even respond. I just turned around and walked out. He texted me later that night at 2:33 a.m. I remember the exact time, saying the spirits like my energy and that I should come again next week, preferably on a full moon. I blocked him immediately. I still don't fully understand what he thought was going to happen. Was I supposed to be impressed, join his ghost fan club, start dating him, and become the next person haunting the cemetery? Whatever the plan was, I'm glad I left when I did. If I'd stayed another hour, I probably would have ended up inside a mausoleum with a dude playing whale sounds and telling me about his past life as a Victorian monk. Moral of the story: if someone says they want to take you somewhere different and won't give you the address until the last minute, just assume it's a cemetery and run the other way. I'm married and I match on one of those apps where everyone has professional headshots and bios that are way too polished. Hers said she worked in marketing, was a single mom, loved bubble tea, and had no time for games. Which, okay, sounded honest. Her photos were all cute, very clean aesthetic, lots of soft lighting and plants in the background. She looked put together, responsible, grown. We messaged back and forth for a week. Nothing super deep, but she was funny and quick with replies. I liked that. She was upfront about having a kid, which I respected. She said being a mom came first, but she was still looking to find a connection, someone mature who could handle real life. I figured that made sense. I'm not a total idiot. I knew dating someone with a kid would be different, but I thought it'd be something we eased into. Over time. Nope. The first red flag should have been when she asked if we could meet at this little cafe that had a play area inside. Like, not just kid-friendly. Full-on jumbo gym in the corner, bright colors, juice boxes on the menu. She said her babysitter canceled last minute but didn't want to reschedule. I didn't want to be a jerk about it, so I said sure. I showed up a few minutes early, sat near the back thinking we'd still try to have some kind of normal-ish adult conversation. And then in walks a Mary with a toddler balanced on her hip and a giant diaper bag slung over her shoulder. Her daughter, who she called Mini A like they were a brand, was cute as hell, but clearly in a mood. Sticky fingers, no shoes, and already mid-tantrum about something involving a missing sock. Mary didn't apologize for being late or frazzled or anything. She just plopped Mini A into a high chair, waved to the staff like she was a regular, and said, "I need caffeine before I become a headline." We ordered. She got an oat milk latte with 2 shots. I got a cold brew. Her daughter got one of those squishy fruit pouches and started screaming when it wasn't the blue one. The people at the next table were already giving us side eyes. I smiled like I was totally fine with all of it. Inside, I was already rethinking my life choices. So we're sitting there trying to talk while Minnie A throws crayons and occasionally demands to see something called Come Me Horse. I thought this was the date. Like, this chaos was it. But then, Mary looked at me and said, "Hey, can you watch her for a sec? I need to step outside." I thought she meant to take a call or have a smoke. Whatever. I nodded, figuring she'd be gone 5 minutes max. 40 minutes. Not even exaggerating. 40 full minutes. At first, I tried to keep the kid entertained. I gave her a sugar packet. We colored. I tried to help her stack creamers into a tower. But 10 minutes in, she was fully bored and started kicking the table and yelling that she wanted her mom. I tried to text Mary. No reply. I walked over to the window and saw her in the parking lot, sitting on the curb with her phone to her ear, laughing. Laughing. Like she was having a casual catch-up with her best friend, not leaving her random first date alone with a child who kept screaming, "You are not my dad" at the top of her lungs. Eventually, Mary came back inside, still mid-call. She sat down, handed her daughter a phone charger like it was a toy, and mouthed just a second to me. Then she kept talking, loudly. I realized, because I could hear every word, that she was FaceTiming her ex, not arguing, not co-parenting, like flirting, teasing him about some shoes he left at her place, saying she missed his stupid beard right there, in front of me. Her daughter was now under the table trying to lick a chair leg, and I was sitting there silently spiraling, realizing I'd officially become a babysitter on a date I didn't even want anymore. After another 10 minutes of this, Mary hung up and looked at me like nothing weird just happened. She smiled and said, "Sorry, co-parenting is wild sometimes, huh?" I didn't even know what to say. Like, how do you respond to someone who just left you with their toddler while they giggled with their ex in a parking lot? She tried to steer the conversation back to light stuff, asking about my weekend plans like everything was chill. I mumbled something about having errands. Her daughter climbed into my lap and wiped jelly on my jeans. Mary laughed and said, "Wow, she never warms up to people this fast. That's a sign." I left 10 minutes later, blaming an imaginary meeting. She waved goodbye like we'd just had this cute bonding afternoon. On the way out, her daughter shouted, "Bye, Daddy," which was probably the most emotionally committed moment of the entire date. She texted me that night saying she thought we had a really organic connection and that she loved how naturally I interacted with kids. I didn't respond. 2 days later, she followed up saying, "You passed the vibe test. Want to do dinner?" I blocked her. I'm still not totally sure what the test was, but I think I failed it on purpose. This guy Drake and I had been messaging for maybe 4 days when he hit me with the most dramatic "I have a surprise for you" I've ever seen. It wasn't just like, "Let's do something fun," or "I planned something nice." It was literally, "Trust me, you're gonna remember this night forever." Which, spoiler alert, I do, but not for any of the reasons he hoped. Anyway, he picked me up in this old minivan that had clearly been a family vehicle at some point. There were crayon marks on the ceiling and some kind of cereal stuck in the seatbelt buckle. I almost asked about it, but decided to mind my business. He had that energy of someone who always has a story locked and loaded, and I wasn't ready to hear how his sister lent him her car after crashing his motorcycle while trying to save a raccoon or whatever. Before I could even ask where we were going, he pulled out a blindfold from the glove box and said he needed me to wear it. Like, straight-faced, no joking, like this was a completely normal part of the night. I literally laughed. I thought it was a bit. He said he wanted the full effect of the experience, and I reluctantly put it on because I was 60% curious, 30% nervous, and 10% in denial that anything could actually be that bad. So I'm in a stranger's minivan, blindfolded, no clue where we're headed, listening to him sing along to some weird ska music like he's in a car commercial for people with anxiety disorders. We drive for what feels like 20 minutes. No clue where we are. He didn't say a word the whole time except, "You're gonna love this." We stop. He turns off the car. I hear what sounds like a metal door opening. Then someone yelling something in the distance. I ask if I can take the blindfold off, and he says not yet. Then we walk, like I'm still blindfolded, and this dude is walking me through a place with gravel and loud voices and weird echoey sounds like we're inside a tunnel. I bump into a trash can or maybe a drum. I genuinely don't know. And he just goes, "Oops, almost there." When he finally takes the blindfold off, we're inside this sketchy warehouse. Not like an abandoned one. More like the kind someone's cousin rents out for events that never end up on social media for good reasons. There's this tiny stage in the corner lit up with string lights. A group of guys are already out there tuning instruments and setting up. There are maybe 6 people sitting on folding chairs in front of it. No crowd, no drinks, just raw concrete, cables everywhere, and the kind of smell that suggests someone tried to Febreze over mildew. I'm still trying to figure out what's going on when one of the guys on stage points at me and goes, "There she is." Trey claps and announces, "Meet your new lead singer, everybody." I laughed again, still thought it was a bit, until one of the dudes actually handed me a mic. They weren't joking. This man brought me to his band's warehouse gig, if you can even call it that, and told everyone I was their new lead singer. No warning, no prep. I hadn't even sung in the shower that week. I didn't know the songs. I didn't know the genre. I didn't know anything except that my blindfold had mascara on it now, and I was wearing sneakers in a place that felt like Ted and us could just jump out of the walls. I looked at him like, "What are you doing?" And he just smiled and said, "You said in your bio you used to sing, remember?" I had said that. Once. That I used to sing in high school. Not professionally, not well. Not in front of people holding instruments with actual amps. He whispered, "Just try it. Feel the moment." Like we were in a musical montage, and this was my big breakthrough. I held the mic and stood there while they started playing a song that sounded like if Red Hot Chili Peppers had a panic attack. I mouthed along to maybe 3 words I recognized, and then fake coughed and handed the mic back. One of the guys shouted, "Dude, she's not feeling it." And Drake was like, "She's just warming up." No, I was not warming up. I was mentally packing up my dignity and checking Google Maps for the nearest exit. The other 6 people sitting there, probably friends of the band, started awkwardly clapping like I just made a brave speech of being a survivor or something. Drake looked disappointed but also kind of excited, like he thought he was in the middle of making this life-changing movie scene, and I was just ruining it by not committing hard enough. I told him I had to go. He tried to convince me to just stay for one full set, and maybe try and do it later. I told him I had a headache and started walking toward the door without waiting for him. He offered to drive me home. I declined. I ordered an Uber and stood outside the warehouse for 10 minutes while I listened to the band start another song that sounded like a blender filled with loose screws. He texted me that night asking what I thought of the vibe and if I wanted to rehearse privately sometime. Blocked. Honestly, I still don't understand what was going through his head. Did he really think I'd fall in love with him mid-song while singing backup in an abandoned Costco with a broken amp and a room full of confused dudes in cargo shorts? I haven't updated my dating profile since then. I'm scared to even say I like music. If I do, the next guy might show up with a harmonica and a dream. Basically, I matched with Maya on a Wednesday, and by Thursday she already wanted to meet up for coffee. I didn't think too much of it because her profile seemed normal enough. Cute pics, a playlist link with decent music, and one of those bios that said she was just looking for something real. I should have paid more attention to the rest of the sentence, though, because it also said something about no more broken promises, which honestly sounds more like a threat than a dating intention. Anyway, she picked the place. It was this artsy little coffee shop tucked between a vape store and a tarot reader's office. You know, the kind of spot where every drink has lavender in it for no reason. I got there first, ordered a cold brew, and grabbed a table near the window. She walked in wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy and sat down across from me like she already knew she was doing me a favor just by being there. Right away she asked if I was nervous, which threw me off. I said no, and she just nodded and said, "You look nervous." That's okay. He used to get nervous too. I let that go because I thought maybe she was talking about a brother or something. Wrong. 2 minutes in, she called me Jason. My name is definitely not Jason. I figured it was an accident. First date nerves. Maybe she had multiple matches going on, whatever. I corrected her gently, like, "Hey, just so you know, it's actually / my name." She blinked once, kind of stared at me, and then went, "Right, yeah, sorry, you just remind me of him." Okay, weird, but still salvageable. I moved on, asked her how her week had been. She started describing a breakdown she had in the canned soup aisle at Target because they stopped carrying her favorite brand, and I thought she was joking until she said, "It just felt like another thing being taken away from me." I sipped my coffee and nodded like that was a totally regular thing to say. She kept going, though. She said she had a history of falling too fast, and that the last few guys she dated all had the same dead behind the eyes thing going on. Then she looked at me and said, "You have that too. I kind of like it." I didn't even know what to say. Like, thanks, sorry? Things got even messier when I mentioned my job. I said something simple, just a quick summary of what I do, and she tilted her head and went, "Oh my God." Jason was also in that field. Like, this is eerie. I tried to laugh it off again, but she wasn't joking. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "It's actually kind of nice, being with someone who gets it, even if it's not real." Even if it's not real? I asked her what that meant, and she shrugged and said, "All relationships are kind of a repeat, aren't they? Like, you meet someone new, but it's just another version of the last person. Faces change, patterns don't." Then she picked up her cup and just sipped like she hadn't just said something out of a therapy session that should have still been happening. At this point, I was basically planning my exit, but she kept talking. She started listing all the similarities between me and Jason. How we sat the same way. How we held our coffee cup the same way. How our hairlines were in a similar category. Not the same, just in the same category. Like we were on a shelf together at some store for emotionally unavailable men. The worst part, She kept calling me Jason even after I corrected her. Not every time, but just randomly. Like her brain kept slipping and then just not bothering to fix it. The third time it happened, she didn't even flinch. I looked up and she just stared at me and said, "Doesn't matter. You're all the same in the end." And I think I went into a full body silence for about 10 seconds. I asked her what she meant by all the same, and she gave this little sigh like she'd explained this to 100 other people before. She said, "Guys are a formula. You chase, you pull back, you gaslight, you get bored. You're basically a system." I said I wasn't sure that was fair, and she just nodded like I'd proved her point by even saying that. After that, I gave up trying to salvage anything. I stared out the window for a minute while she scrolled through her phone and laughed at something, probably a meme about abandonment or whatever. I told her I had a meeting to get to, and she said, "Cool. Thanks for not bossing." Yeah. I walked up feeling like I'd just been mistaken for someone's emotional punching bag and then thanked for participating. She didn't follow up. I didn't message her again. But 2 days later, I saw she'd uploaded a news story with a coffee shop selfie in the caption. Jason 2.0 was nice enough. Still glitchy. That was me. I was Jason 2.0. I don't even use that app anymore. I can't look at lavender lats the same way again. I matched with Joseph on a Thursday night when I was bored and doom scrolling through dating apps like it was a part-time job. His profile wasn't even that good, honestly. His photos were kind of weird, like one where he was at the gym holding a protein shaker in front of a mirror that hadn't been cleaned since 2008. Another where he stood next to a luxury car he probably didn't own. And then one of him on a hiking trail with a caption that just said Alpha, no punctuation. Just that one word. I should have swiped left, I know. But he had one of those bios that seemed confident in a maybe this guy owns a pressure washer kind of way, and I had nothing better going on. He messaged first. It wasn't a gross pickup line or anything. Just, "You seem sharp. Drink sometime." And that was enough to get me to say sure. We set up a meetup for Saturday night at this bar downtown that tried really hard to look like it wasn't trying too hard. Exposed brick, menus printed on paper bags, bartenders who act like they invented whiskey. Anyway, I showed up like 10 minutes late on purpose because I've learned not to give men extra time to be weird. When I got there, he was already sitting in a booth with 2 drinks on the table, one whiskey something for him, and a pink drink he just had a feeling I'd like, which was weird but okay. I said thanks, sat down, and we did the usual awkward small talk. Jobs, siblings, favorite pizza toppings. The first 10 minutes were fine. Not great, but fine. Then he asked, "Do you care about politics?" I said something like, "I mean, yeah, I try to stay informed." And he smiled like I just passed the first round of some twisted game show. This man took that question as an open invitation to launch into a 45-minute monologue about how he thinks society has gone off the rails. Started with taxes, then government overreach, then school systems. And he hit me with, honestly, democracy might have been a mistake, like just casually tossing that into conversation like it was his favorite pizza topping. At that point, I was still trying to figure out if he was trolling or just really proud of having an opinion. So I asked him what he meant. Big mistake. He smiled and leaned in like he was about to reveal the secret to life, and then said, "Well, for starters, I don't think women should vote." Dead serious. No irony. No smirk. Just full eye contact and the worst sentence I've heard on a date in my life. I laughed at first because I genuinely thought he was joking. Like maybe this was some sarcastic test to see if I'd call him out. But no, he doubled down. He actually said, "Most women vote with emotion, not logic. The data proves it." I asked him what data, and he said, "You can just feel it." Like his feelings somehow counted as statistics. At this point, I was already mentally checking out, but I stayed seated because I wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. He went on to say he thinks only people with proven leadership experience should be allowed to vote. When I asked what that even meant, he said stuff like being a business owner or head of a household. I asked him how he defined head of household, and he said, the man, usually. Then he told me he loved strong women that didn't think they should lead nations, and he said it like he was doing me a favor. Like I should thank him for the nuance. I asked him if he thought he sounded sexist, and he said, "It's not sexist if it's true." Then he sipped his whiskey and added, "I bet you're different, though. I can tell you're smart." You're not like the others. Right. Because apparently I was the chosen one in his dystopian Hunger Games of dating logic. Then, as if that wasn't enough, while I was still trying to process what just came out of his mouth, he reached across the table and grabbed my hand. Said something about how rare it was to find someone who can handle his perspective. And then, this is the part that still makes my skin crawl. They tried to kiss me. Like right there, mid-lecture, mid-political mansplaining, after basically telling me I was too emotional to vote, this guy decided it was a perfect moment to lean in for a kiss like he just dropped the most romantic take ever. I flinched so hard I spilled my drink. Rum and coke went all over the table and splashed onto his sleeve. He pulled back and looked honestly shocked, like he couldn't believe I wasn't swooning after he deconstructed basic human rights for 40 minutes. He grabbed a napkin, started wiping his arm, and laughed. Sorry, I just feel like we have real chemistry. Chemistry. This man told me I was too emotional to vote, and then tried to kiss me while soaking in my spilled drink, and he called it chemistry. I stood up and grabbed my bag. He asked if I wanted him to walk me to my car. I told him I was good. He said, "You sure? It's a weird neighborhood." And I said, "Yeah, and you're the weirdest part of it." Walked straight out, ordered a rideshare from the sidewalk, and tried to mentally cleanse my brain of every single word that came out of that man's mouth. The best part, he texted me an hour later. Said he thought the conversation was stimulating and that he appreciated how I held my own. Then he followed that with, "Next time, we should talk about marriage dynamics." There wasn't going to be a next time. I blocked him before he could send me a TED talk about how I probably shouldn't own property either. And for the record, I voted that week. Twice, just kidding. But I wanted to. This started off with kind of a fluke match on a dating app. I wasn't even really looking for anything serious. I was just swiping while waiting for my laundry to dry, and Eddie popped up. His profile had that clean living vibe, lots of green juice, shirtless hiking photos, a weird number of shots of him in front of waterfalls. I figured, okay, maybe he's into wellness, big deal. I can deal with a few protein shakes if someone's fun to talk to. We messaged for a few days, mostly sending me random facts about fruit and how certain ones are inflammatory, and me pretending to care. He seemed super enthusiastic and asked me out to dinner. I said sure, assuming we'd go somewhere chill, someplace where you can get a burger and not have to decode the menu like it's a science experiment. He picked this vegan spot downtown. I'm not against vegan food at all, but this place had stuff on the menu like spirulina foam with activated lentil puree and deconstructed chickpea essence, which sounded more like an art project than dinner. I showed up wearing jeans and a hoodie because I thought we were just doing the casual thing, and he was wearing this linen button-up like he was about to lead a meditation retreat. Not judging, just painting a picture. I barely got a hi in before he launched into this intense thing about how he fasts on Mondays and doesn't believe in sitting too close to Wi-Fi routers. I kind of nodded along, but inside I was like, oh no, this is gonna be one of those nights. The server came over and asked if we wanted water, and Eddie cut me off and said, filtered, room temperature. No ice. I was literally about to ask for sparkling. But then he turns to the server and goes, also, she's severely allergic to gluten and dairy. So we'll need to make sure everything is totally clean, no contamination. I sat there stunned for a second, like, did he just make up an entire medical history for me? I tried to speak up, but he put a hand on my menu and said, trust me, you'll feel so much better eating clean tonight. I wasn't trying to start drama with a waiter standing there, so I kind of laughed awkwardly, like, okay, sure, and just hoped it would blow over. Spoiler, it did not. He ordered for both of us. I got this plate of cold spiralized zucchini with what he called immune-boosting pesto, and he had some raw taco thing wrapped in seaweed. It tasted like flavored grass, and I was still kind of hungry after the third bite. But I guess that didn't matter, because the real main course was the 2-hour lecture he gave me across the table. It started with him asking what I usually eat. I said I had cereal that morning. A big mistake. He looked horrified, like I just admitted to licking batteries or something. Then he went off about grains being neurologically aggressive and how cow's milk is designed to grow a 2,000-pound animal and that humans have no business drinking it. I tried to joke that I still liked cheese, but he said dairy was the reason people had emotional instability. He asked if I had trouble sleeping, then suggested it was probably from invisible mold spores and standard grocery produce. At one point, he started talking about how cooking food destroys its life force, and I literally had to ask, "So you just don't cook anything?" He smiled and said, "Exactly." It was like being trapped in a podcast with no pause button. He barely asked me any actual questions about myself. The one time he did, I mentioned I worked in marketing, and he immediately said I was probably overstimulated by screen culture and should consider a digital detox. I had no idea how to respond, so I just chewed my zucchini noodles and wished I was home. Halfway through, he pulled out this little vial of clear liquid from his pocket, dropped it into his water, and told me it was structured hydrogen. I was scared to ask what that even meant. Then he leaned in and said very seriously that the fluoride in city water was calcifying everyone's pineal gland. I don't even know what my pineal gland does, but I guess mine's ruined now. The funniest part is he didn't notice how miserable I looked. He kept smiling like he was sharing the secrets of the universe with me. He talked about vibrational eating and how you can feel the anger in cooked meat, even though we were at a vegan restaurant. He told me to look into sun gazing as a way to naturally absorb nutrients through my eyes. I'm not kidding. Like, what are you even supposed to say to that? Cool, I'll stare at the sun tomorrow. When the check came, he didn't even flinch. He paid, which was nice, I guess, but also kind of made me feel like I owed him a thank you for the raw salad and food guilt. Outside, he asked if I wanted to go to a nearby juice bar that had oxygen infusions. I said I had to work early, which was a lie, but there was no way I was following him to a second location where I might end up sipping kale air. He hugged me goodbye, gave me a weird little packet of supplements, and said I should take them if I felt foggy in the morning. I walked straight to the nearest taco truck, bought 2 greasy carne asada tacos, and sat on the curb eating them like it was the best meal of my life. And it honestly kind of was. He texted the next day and asked if I'd done any grounding that morning, something about walking barefoot on grass to absorb Earth's magnetic energy. I didn't reply. I still have the supplement packet in my drawer somewhere. It's probably just powdered grass and wishful thinking. Anyway, if someone tells you they're into clean eating, just make sure they don't mean, "I'm going to lie to your waiter and psychoanalyze your breakfast choices." That was the last date I ever agreed to where someone insisted on picking the restaurant. I don't care if the next guy wants to go to a gas station deli. I'm ordering for myself. Right. So this one started off way too normal, which now I realize was the first red flag. Like the kind of normal where you're sitting there thinking, this is going a little too smoothly. I met Brooke through this mutual friend situation. One of those, you guys would totally hit it off setups where nobody really knows if the person they're setting you up with is sane or not. They just happen to both be single and in the same zip code. She had a chill vibe, talked fast, wore these big round glasses that made her look smarter than anyone should at a sushi bar, and she had this calm confidence that made you think she probably drank tea and journaled a lot. I was into it. We messaged for a few days and then made a plan to meet up at this low-key sushi place. Not a chain, not a hole in the wall. Just that sweet meal zone with decent prices and a server who doesn't hover. We're maybe 20 minutes into the date and everything feels fine. She's funny. She ordered steak without making it a whole personality trait. And she didn't bring up astrology or cryptocurrency, which at this point I consider a win. Somewhere between the edamame and the first round of sushi rolls, she casually drops, "Oh, by the way, I'm married. But it's chill, we're totally open." I don't really react right away. Not because I'm into that, but because I'm trying to process it without making a face. She says it like she's telling me she just got a new phone or something. No build-up. Just married open-ness. I ask a couple questions, keep it surface level. How long, how open do they, schedule stuff out? And she answers it all like it's totally standard. I start thinking, okay, maybe this isn't my scene, but I'll at least finish my tuna roll before deciding. 10 minutes later, I'm halfway through my miso soup and trying to figure out how to pivot the conversation back to something neutral when I notice her glancing over my shoulder, like she saw someone she knew. At first, I think it's just a friend or something. But no, this tall guy in a wrinkled hoodie and gym shorts strolls over to the table and just stands there. Doesn't say hi. Doesn't wait to be introduced. Just looks directly at me and goes, "So this is him." I don't know what to say. I look at Brooke, and she just smiles like this is totally normal. Oh, this is scene, she says, super casual. My husband. My brain short circuits for a second. I half laugh trying to read the situation like, okay, maybe this is just one of those weird open relationship dynamics where everyone's super chill and introduces each other over appetizers. I stick out my hand like an idiot and say, hey man, and he just stares at it. He sits down at the booth next to her, uninvited, like this is a family dinner. She doesn't even flinch. She just scoots over to make room for him. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there thinking, do I leave? Is this some test? Are they gonna offer me a pyramid scheme or a key party invite? Then Scene leans forward and hits me with, I just want to know how long you two have been talking. I tell him I like a week, and he nods really slow like that explains something. Then he says, cool, cool. Just wanted to see what kind of guy was trying to fill my emotional slot. Direct quote. My jaw is somewhere on the soy sauce dish at this point. Brooke doesn't even react. She just sips her water and goes, we agreed we'd be open. And he fires back, yeah, I agreed, but I didn't think you'd go out with someone who looks like a camp counselor. I don't even know what that meant. I was wearing a flannel and sneakers, normal stuff, but I guess it triggered something in him. It gets weirder. He starts talking about how every time she dates someone new, he has to go through this internal reckoning and how therapy isn't cheap. Then he pulls out his phone, opens Venmo, and asks me to pitch in a little for his emotional labor. Like straight up asks for $40. Says it's not about the money, just the principle. I think I blacked out for a second. I tell him I'm not paying him anything, and this whole situation is completely unhinged. He gets a little louder, like trying to make a scene, and starts talking about how he's trying to build a transparent emotional economy. Brooke just sits there, watching us like we're two cats fighting over a sunny windowsill. Finally, I slide out of the booth, toss a $20 on the table to cover my part of the check, and tell him good luck with their whatever this is. As I walk out, Scene calls after me, that flannel's not even real wool, bro. Which, I guess was supposed to be an insult. Still confused about that one. I sat in my car for like 15 minutes afterward, just scrolling through Uber Eats, trying to recalibrate my night with some greasy food in silence. Never texted Brooke back. She actually messaged me 2 days later with sorry about Scene. He gets like that. Want to try again, just us. I didn't respond. I now have a strict no open relationship rule on first dates, second dates, all dates forever. If I ever hear the phrase emotional slot again, I might physically evaporate. I wasn't expecting anything weird, honestly. We met at this trivia night thing that a friend dragged me to, and Megan seemed totally normal, like funny, kind of sarcastic, a little intense in that way that just makes you think she's got a strong personality. I remember thinking her laugh sounded kind of fake, but whatever, maybe she was nervous. We hit it off, or at least I thought we did, and after a few texts back and forth, she invited me over to her place for dinner. So here's the thing. On a little old school about first, hanging out things. I don't love going to someone's apartment if I don't know them that well, but she seems super confident, and I figured maybe it'd be like one of those low-pressure, wine in order and kind of nights. But I get there and she's got the lights dimmed, candles going, jazz playing. Not romantic jazz, more like that weird experimental stuff with no rhythm that people pretend to like. Her apartment was also way too clean, but not in a cozy way. It felt like an Airbnb someone only rents out to rich business guys. She poured me a glass of wine before I even sat down and told me she made mushroom risotto, but it smelled like microwave Trader Joe's food. She was talking a lot, mostly about stuff she was into, like she had this hyper-specific collection of 90s keychains and wound long rants about video game lore. I was listening, nodding, trying to follow, but then she kind of stopped mid-sentence, tilted her head, and asked me to follow her to her editing room. I thought she was joking. I laughed a little like, ha, okay. But no, she opens this door, and the whole room is decked out with monitors and what looked like editing equipment. There were shelves with labeled hard drives and post-its stuck everywhere, like a conspiracy theory wall, but digital. She sat down at this massive desk, clicked through a couple folders, and then turned to me like it was story time. She said something like, I think it's important to be able to track growth, and then she clicked on a folder called Date Archives. I'm not kidding. Inside it were subfolders, each one with a guy's name and a number. She opened one labeled Direct 6.2, and played a clip that was clearly taken from some hidden camera angle in a coffee shop. It was him sitting across from her, talking about his trip to Japan or something. She zoomed in and out like she was doing playback analysis. She even paused it and made a comment about his hand gestures being overcompensating. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at the screen, kind of in disbelief, while she casually played 2 more clips from different guys, pointing out why they scored low. One guy apparently got a 4.1 because he said he liked olives, and that's a major red flag for her. I asked, kind of trying to joke, if I had a folder already. She didn't laugh. Then she opened a folder labeled with my name. First name, last initials were pending. I hadn't even realized she'd recorded us at trivia night. But there it was, a wide-angle clip of us sitting at a table, grainy but clear enough to see everything. You could hear me making some dumb joke about movie soundtracks. She had clipped it down, added little timestamps and comments in text boxes like she was doing a YouTube breakdown video. One said low assertiveness when I deferred a trivia answer to her. Another said potentially funny with a question mark. I just sat there like, what the hell is happening? I didn't even know how to react. I think I made some awkward comment like, wow, you really commit to stuff, huh? She kind of nodded and said she's been doing it for 3 years. Every date. She said it helps her avoid wasting time. It didn't even seem to occur to her how completely messed up it was. She acted like this was just her version of keeping a diary. I stood up and mumbled something about needing to get up early, but she stopped me before I could get to the door and asked if I wanted to know my score now or later. I said I was good and practically sprinted down the hallway to the elevator. The wild part is she texted me the next morning like it was no big deal. Just a casual, had fun last night. Let me know if you want to hang again. Score, 6.5, lots of potential. Like she was reviewing a new vacuum cleaner or something. I blocked her immediately, and I still think about how many other guys must be in that archive. Like, there's probably some poor dude who thinks he blew it because he said he didn't like hummus. I told my friends about it later, and nobody believed me until I showed them the text. One of them actually said, you should have asked to see your bloopers reel. And I still laugh about that, but also, it's kind of messed up that she had that level of surveillance just casually going on. The weirdest part. Every once in a while, when I'm at a bar or out with someone new, I find myself looking around just to check if there's a camera pointed at me. Like, what if I'm already in someone's file, getting analyzed by some stranger who thinks they're building a dating database? Anyway, that was the last time I ever agreed to go over to someone's place for a low-key night without knowing them better. Okay, so this one still feels fake when I tell people about it, but I promise, it happened exactly like this. It was a Friday. I had just finished the worst week of work ever, and I was really just looking for a distraction. Nothing serious. I'd matched with Zach a few days before on this app where everyone either has their dog in every picture or is holding a fish, and he seemed like one of the rare normal ones. His bio was short, something like music, tacos, and good vibes. Which doesn't say much, but at least he didn't open with 6 on since apparently that matters. He asked me to dinner and I said yes because I was too tired to think of a reason not to. He picked this family-run Mexican place I'd actually been meaning to try for months. Already a plus. We planned to meet at 7. I showed up on time. He showed up 5 minutes later with someone. I'm standing there in the little entrance area by the hostess stand, and I see him walking out through the window. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then I see this woman next to him, and at first, I assume maybe it's a friend dropping him off. Or like he ran into a neighbor. But no, he walks in, gives me this casual, hey, and then goes, this is my mom. No heads up. No warning. Just bam, here's my mother. I laugh because I assume it's a joke, like, ha, good one. But nope, he hugs her, then looks at me and says, I thought it'd be cool for you two to meet early on, Rip the Band-Aid off. And I'm standing there thinking, what Band-Aid? This is our first date. There is no Band-Aid. There's not even a band. The hostess takes us to a table, one of those corner booths that are made for 4 people, but now it's just me squished in on one side with his mom directly across from me and Zach next to her like we're on some kind of weird job interview panel. And I'm not even kidding when I say Zach's mom was ready. She had a purse full of those little purse mints, a binder clip holding together her coupons, and a vibe that said, I've been waiting to interrogate you since breakfast. She asked me what I do, where I grew up, how many siblings I have, if I've ever considered switching to an electric car. and how I feel about Costco memberships, all in the first 10 minutes. She also insisted we all split the guacamole because it's too expensive for just one person. Meanwhile, Zach is quiet, like unusually quiet. He looks bored, borderline annoyed, and after we order, he suddenly stands up and goes, "I'm gonna step outside for a smoke real quick." I assumed he meant a quick cig and he'd be back in like 2 minutes. Nope. He left me there, alone, with his mom, on our first date. She didn't even seem surprised. She just picked up her menu and started asking me if I've ever tried intermittent fasting and whether I've found Jesus yet. I thought about making up a fake emergency just to escape, but she was blocking the exit side of the booth, so I was trapped. 10 minutes go by, then 20. I text him, "Hey, you good?" No response. She's telling me this long story about how Zach was almost valedictorian but didn't want the pressure, and how he once dated a girl who wore too much mascara. I sip my water like it's alcohol and glance at the door every 5 seconds. At one point, the server comes to check on us and literally asks, "Are you guys okay?" Because it's been half an hour and Zach still hasn't returned. I half laugh and say, "Yeah, he's just getting some air." I was this close to asking for the check myself. But then Zach finally strolls back in like nothing happened, sits down, and starts eating chips. Doesn't say a word about disappearing. His mom asks if everything's okay, and he shrugs and goes, "Yeah, I just needed a little space." And I'm like, "From what?" The chips, the mild salsa, me, the stranger who didn't ask for a dinner with a parent. Dinner continues like nothing's wrong. His mom tells me I seem grounded, which I think was a compliment. Zach checks his phone constantly and talks maybe 3 times, all of which were him asking for more salsa. When the check comes, he lets it sit there. I wait a second, assuming he's reaching for it. Nope, nothing, just vibes. I end up throwing down my card just to get out faster. And then his mom goes, "That's so thoughtful of you." Zach usually forgets his wallet anyway, and he doesn't even deny it. We walk out into the parking lot, and he's like, "So this was cool. Want to do something next weekend?" I don't even know how to respond, so I just give him a vague, "I'll let you know," and I tip out like I'm fleeing a crime scene. I got a text later that night from his mom, not even him, his mom, saying it was lovely meeting me and that I had a sweet face. I didn't respond. The next day, Zach sent a message saying, "Sorry if that was weird, but my mom's super important to me." I left it on read. And yeah, I still haven't gone back to that restaurant. Not because the food was bad, but because I don't want to risk running into a middle-aged woman asking if I've accepted the Lord into my life while I'm trying to eat enchiladas. I met Anna in the most boring way possible through a comment thread on someone's Instagram story. It was this mutual friend's party recap where she had posted a table full of empty drinks, and I made some stupid comment about how vodka sodas are a cry for help. Anna replied with, "What does that say about whiskey sours then?" And we just kept going back and forth roasting drink orders until it somehow turned into a plan to get drinks ourselves. I thought it was gonna be this fun, kind of sarcastic vibe, like 2 people who could take a joke and not take each other too seriously. She suggested this speakeasy-style bar downtown that has 0 signage and only 1 menu, and I instantly knew this was gonna be one of those try-hard spots where people wear suspenders and use the word mouthfeel unironically. But I was like, fine, let's see where this goes. When I got there, she was already sitting at the bar, sipping what I later found out was a Negroni. She looked put together in that very precise, curated way, red lipstick that didn't budge all night, trench coat, those rectangle glasses that say, "I know more than you," and probably minored in philosophy. I said, "Hey," sat down, ordered a beer, and that was apparently the beginning of the end. The second the bartender walked away with my order, she tilted her head and said, "Interesting choice." I asked what she meant, and she goes, "Beer on a first date." That says a lot. I laughed because I thought she was joking, like throwing it back to our Instagram thread, but she wasn't joking at all. She stared at me like I'd just revealed my deepest secret. She said beer drinkers are typically emotionally avoidant, nostalgic for childhood, and have unresolved authority issues. I kind of smiled like, haha, okay, Dr. Freud, but she just nodded like she was taking mental notes. It didn't stop there. The drinks come as she launches into this whole thing about how our generation uses alcohol choices as identity shields, and I was like, is this an intervention or a date? I tried to steer the convo towards something normal, music, movies, literally anything that didn't involve diagnosing me. But she was locked in. She asked if I had a good relationship with my dad. I was like, yeah, I mean, he's chill. And she goes, you hesitated. That's probably something there. And I'm just sitting there thinking we are 15 minutes into this date, and I'm being emotionally dissected like a frog in bio class. She kept asking questions that felt more like traps. Like, when you're alone, do you keep background noise on? I said, yeah, I usually have music playing. And she goes, ah, fear of stillness. Classic. I started sipping my beer faster because I needed to finish it just to have something to do with my hands. At one point, she asked what I was like in high school, and I said I was kind of quiet, didn't really party. She immediately said, that tracks. People who didn't peak socially in high school often develop a late-stage performance identity, whatever that means. I asked if she was a psych major or something, and she smiled and said, no, I just observe, which is somehow scarier. Half an hour in, I realized I didn't know anything about her besides the fact that she could turn any sentence into a full-blown analysis. So I asked what she does for work. She said she works in UX design, then somehow connected that to why she has a deep understanding of human behavior, and then circled back to tell me that the way I held my beer glass with two hands meant I was seeking subconscious comfort. Like, girl, maybe I'm just cold. Or maybe the glass is wet. Why is everything a thesis? I tried to push through, thinking maybe once we got past the drinks and small talk she'd relax a little. Nope. I ordered a second beer, because at that point I was too far into switch, and she actually said, doubling down on your inner child, I see. I straight up choked on it a little. I wanted to ask her what a whiskey sour said about her, but honestly, I didn't want to know. I was scared she'd pull out a laminated chart. She also said that people who laugh after everything they say are usually trying to self-soothe. I swear to God, I became hyper-aware of my own breathing after that. I tried to not even blink weirdly. By the end of the date, she was basically doing a full diagnostic breakdown of my personality. She told me I probably struggle with vulnerability, don't trust compliments, and have an underlying fear of being misunderstood. I wanted to say, no, I just thought we were gonna roast drinks and flirt a little, but instead I just smiled and said, wow, you got all that from one beer. She nodded like she was proud, like she cracked a code. Then she asked if I wanted to go for a walk to continue this energetic exchange, and I told her I had to wake up early for something I made up on the spot. She didn't seem offended. She just said, that makes sense, like she already predicted I'd bail. She hugged me goodbye and whispered, good luck with your healing. Not joking. Word for word. On the way home, I stopped at a gas station and bought a six-pack, partly because I needed it and partly because I wanted to reclaim beer from whatever psychological prison she had put it in. I still think about that night sometimes, especially when someone tries to make a personality quiz out of ordering a drink. If I wanted therapy, I'd go pay for it. Josh was one of those guys who looked way more interesting online than he did in person. His profile was full of black and white photos, some taken at weird angles, like his friend was lying on the ground or hanging from a tree to get the artistic shot. Lots of quotes about truth and consciousness, and one picture of him standing in a field holding a book with no title on it. Mysterious, I guess. He messaged me something about how my smile radiated contradiction, and I should run right then, but I was bored and mildly curious. We ended up picking this little Thai place for our first date. I got there first and waited outside. He showed up wearing the most aggressively wrinkled button-up shirt I've ever seen in real life, carrying a tote bag with the words, unlearn everything printed across it. He gave me this half-hug, half-bow thing, and said something about meeting energy instead of expectations. I literally just nodded like, okay, sure, let's do this. We sit down, and immediately the server brings us menus. I start looking through mine, and before I can say anything, Josh goes, before we order, I just want to make sure we're on the same page about power dynamics. I looked up thinking maybe he meant something light, like splitting the check or something, but nah. This man had a whole theory locked and loaded. He told me very seriously that he doesn't believe in paying for dates because doing so reinforces outdated gender roles and puts men in a position of control. He called it economic seduction, which honestly sounded like a weird scam or a bad band name. I said I was fine splitting the check and Eva was good. I only date women who understand the transactional nature of traditional courtship. I hadn't even picked my food yet. When the server came back, he ordered tofu pad CU with no MSG, no sugar, no emotional labor, which made the server pause for a second before nodding and just writing it down. I ordered something basic and immediately braced for judgment. Sure enough, Josh launched into a breakdown of how many choices reflect capitalist conditioning and how spice levels are a metaphor for our resistance to discomfort. He asked me what I did for a living, and I told him I work in digital marketing, which he said was the art of selling people back their own insecurities. Cool. Thanks. Then he started asking me about how I move through the world, which I think was his way of asking what I'm like, but in a way that made it sound like I'm a character in a novel. I tried to keep it casual, but he kept flipping everything I said into a TED Talk. Like when I mentioned I watch trashy reality TV, sometimes to relax, and he said that escapism is a form of spiritual surrender. The food finally came, and as we started eating, he asked me if I'd ever unlearned a belief system that was installed during childhood. I said, sure, I guess like most people. And then he said, tell me about your mother. Which no, not happening over noodles. At some point during the meal, he went on this full monologue about the false binary of romantic intention and how society has forced men to either be predators or providers. I honestly stopped listening halfway through because I was too focused on how loud he was chewing. But then came the real kicker. He leaned in, lowered his voice like we were conspiring against someone, and said, I think we got good polarity. You challenge me in a way that's grounding. I had no clue what that meant. Before I could ask, he said, we should keep this energy going. Want to come back to my place and debate equality in depth? I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. I said I was good, thanks, and he looked genuinely confused, like he thought I'd be flattered. Like this was some enlightened seduction strategy and I just wasn't elevated enough to get it. He leaned back, took a deep breath, and said, most people are afraid of the intellectual intimacy they claim to crave. I said, or maybe I just don't want to go to a stranger's apartment after eating green curry. And he said, that's valid. We got the check, and he made a whole point of splitting it down to the cent, then wrote his Venmo handle on a napkin just in case I wanted to contribute to the emotional cost of his vulnerability. I didn't, obviously. As we walked out, he told me I had potential and that he'd be open to a co-learning partnership in the future. I said thanks, but I think I'm gonna keep learning alone, and he nodded like that was some profound breakup line, even though we weren't a thing for more than 90 minutes. He texted me the next morning to send a link to an article titled Monogamy is a Tool of the Elite, and I blocked his number right after. I don't even remember what the article said because I didn't click it. But I do remember that when I told my friends about the date, one of them just said, Josh sounds like a guy who's been broken up with for using the phrase consensual power exchange too casually, and I've never felt more seen. I met Olivia at a bowling alley of all places. Not even like a trendy retro one, just a regular low-lit sticky shoes, weird-smelling bowling alley where people go to eat nachos and pretend they're good at sports. I was there with a couple friends for someone's birthday, and she was in the next lane over, yelling at the guy behind the counter because he wouldn't let her bring in a giant reusable water jug from home. Not like a hydro flask, I'm talking industrial size. Like, if she dropped it, it could have rolled through drywall. She ended up joining our group for a couple of games, and honestly, at first, she seemed cool in a chaotic way. Kind of intense, super confident, talked with her hands a lot. She said something about truth-seeking and asked me if I had ever considered the possibility that birds were drones. I thought she was joking, she wasn't. Anyway, we exchanged numbers because she was funny and said I had stable eyes, whatever that means. A few days later, she asked if I wanted to grab smoothies and talk off the grid, which should have been a warning sign, but I figured she just meant like chill and unplugged. She picked the spot. It was this weird little juice bar in the back of a yoga studio that also sold crystals, and I kid you not, copper toe rings for spiritual circulation. I'm walking in and she's already sitting on the floor, not even at a table, just legs crossed, sipping something neon green out of a mason jar. She waves me over like she's about to read my fortune and says, welcome to the truth space. I sit down across from her, and the first thing she says is, before we talk, I need to know if you believe in the curvature lie. I'm like, ha. And she goes, the earth. You don't actually think it's round, right? I laugh because obviously I think she's messing with me, but she just stares, dead serious. I tried to steer around it by saying I haven't really thought about it deeply, which was a lie, but I wasn't about to get into a planetary argument over AK bowls. But that wasn't good enough. She needed confirmation, like full-on loyalty to the Flat Earth Club. She pulled out her phone and showed me this folder of screenshots from Reddit threads, Instagram stories, and something called the Firmament Files. There was even a diagram she drew by hand on a napkin of how airline routes are proof, because no one flies straight across the southern hemisphere. I wanted to ask if she thought pilots were in on it, but honestly, I didn't want to give her more material. I tried to lighten the mood by asking how she got into all this, and she said it all started when she stopped wearing sunscreen. According to Olivia, global warming is fake and was invented by Big Lotion to sell more sunscreen and justify taxes. I asked her if she ever got sunburned, and she said no, because the real sun doesn't hurt you. It's the chemicals reacting with fear. Like, what do you even say to that? I just blinked slowly and took a big sip of my smoothie to stall. She also said clouds were sky propaganda and claimed she hadn't been to the doctor in 8 years because diagnoses are just spells. At one point, she took a picture of her drink and posted it to something called her healing grid, which I think was either a blog or some weird off-brand social media site. She didn't explain. I didn't ask. Somehow, she also worked in a rant about how Antarctica isn't real and how GPS was designed to keep us mentally boxed in. She said she once tried to drive to the edge during a solo trip through the desert, but her car mysteriously broke down, and that's how she knew the government was tracking her. I asked if she called AAA, and she said no. She used crystals and directional meditation. And then she got kind of serious and said, I like your vibe. I think you could be one of us if you just let go of what you've been taught. I asked what one of us meant, and she said she was part of a group, like not a cult, but also definitely cult adjacent, that hosts sky truthing retreats where they lie in fields and yell questions at the moon. She said it helps deprogram your soul. She leaned in really close and whispered, have you ever looked at the moon and felt like it was watching you back? I said no, mostly because I was scared she'd take it as a challenge and start staring at it for answers right there in the juice bar. I checked the time and told her I had to get going soon. She asked if I wanted to come back to her place to watch a documentary called Water is Not Wet, and I politely declined. She nodded like she understood, but said I should sleep with my phone in another room tonight so the waves don't mess with my chakras. I told her I'd think about it. As I was leaving, she gave me a rock, just handed it to me and said, keep this close. It'll help you shed the illusions. I said thanks and put it in my pocket like it was no big deal, then tossed it in my glove compartment as soon as I got in my car. I still occasionally get random messages from her on Telegram, usually videos with grainy voiceovers about how the ocean isn't real or how birds work for Microsoft. One time she sent me a photo of the sky and just captioned it lies. I haven't responded to anything, but sometimes when the clouds look weird, I do kind of hear her voice in the back of my head saying, they're not natural. Then I open Google Maps, remind myself the earth is still round, and carry on. Okay, so I met Matt at this bar trivia night my coworker dragged me to on a Wednesday. I was already in a bad mood because I had a dumb fight with my roommate about who left a plate in the sink, and I almost bailed on the whole thing. But I went because the bar had good fries and I thought it might be nice to yell out random facts for a bit. Matt was there with a different team, and we only started talking because the trivia host made some dumb pun about Harry Potter, and he turned around and laughed at my groan. I guess I rolled my eyes loud enough for it to be noticeable. He made some joke back and forth with me about how all trivia hosts secretly want to be on Broadway, and it was actually kind of funny. We kept making comments across tables, and by the end of the night, he walked over and said something about how my sarcasm was weirdly soothing. Which, okay, I don't even know what that means, but I gave him my number anyway because it felt like one of those moments you only get when you say yes just to see what happens. He texted the next day and asked if I wanted to grab drinks that Friday. I said sure, assuming we'd go to another bar or something casual, but he suggested this weirdly fancy rooftop lounge downtown. I was surprised, but he said he'd take care of everything, and I didn't feel like arguing. I show up and he's already got a table somehow, probably bribed someone or lied, because this place usually has a wait list longer than a CVS receipt. He's wearing a button-up and smells like cologne that costs more than my internet bill, and I thought, okay, maybe he's trying to make a good impression. He orders a fancy whiskey for himself and tells me to pick whatever speaks to my current emotional state. I laugh and order a gin and tonic, and he nods like I've just revealed something deep about myself. He says I give off mid-2000s indie band lead singer energy, which honestly, I kind of liked. The conversation is flowing, we're roasting people's outfits. He's saying all the right things. Funny, self-aware, just the right amount of flirty without being gross. And I remember thinking, damn, is this guy actually good? We're maybe halfway through the night, on our second drink, when I ask him something basic like if he always goes to that bar or if this was a special occasion. He looks off into the distance, kind of dramatic, then turns back and goes, I'll be real with you since we're vibing. I'm actually engaged. At first, I thought he meant previously, like he was engaged once and it ended or whatever. But no, he meant currently. As in, he has a fiancée right now and they are planning a wedding, like rings and RSVPs and all that. I stared at him for a second, waiting for the just kidding part. It never came. He took a sip of his drink and said, I just wanted to see if I could still get it, like he was testing himself at the gym or something. I asked him what the hell he meant, and he said he's been with his fiancée for 6 years. They met in college, and everything's been comfortable for too long. So he thought, just for fun, he'd try going on a date to make sure he still had pull, his actual word, pull, like on some kind of social experiment. I asked him if she knew about this, and he said, of course not. But I'm not doing anything. I'm just talking to you. It's harmless. Harmless, like dragging some stranger out for a date under false pretenses just to see if your ego still works isn't weird. I was so thrown off I didn't even know what to say at first. He told me I was great validation and that I should be flattered, as if I was supposed to thank him for the honor of being used as his emotional mirror or something. Then he said something about how everyone has a little curiosity before commitment and tried to compare it to test driving a car before buying it, which one, gross, and two, is seeing to dealership. I asked him if he even liked his fiancée, and he said, yeah, she's amazing. I just don't know if I'm ready to give up the thrill. I told him maybe don't propose if you're still out here chasing thrill in rooftop bars and lying to people for sport. He said I was overreacting and that I seemed chill at trivia, like I'd somehow agreed to be emotionally manipulated because I knew who invented the printing press. Then he had the audacity to ask if I still wanted to go back to his place just to talk and maybe listen to some records. Like I didn't just find out I was his pre-marriage confidence boost. I told him I was gonna head out, and he actually said, no hard feelings, right? As if we had a disagreement about pizza toppings and not, reality. I walked to the elevator and didn't even look back. The second the doors closed, I texted my friend and said, you will not believe the stunt this dude just pulled. And then I sat in my car for 20 minutes blasting angry music just to rinse it off. A few days later, he messaged me with, hey, hope everything's good. You're a dope person. I didn't respond. Blocked his number. I hope his fiancée finds out and uses his face to light the wedding candles. It started when Chloe and I matched on this app that no one really uses unless they're either bored or stuck in a small town for too long. I was in both categories. It was the kind of app where everyone's profile looks like it was made in a rush. Blurry mirror selfies, cropped X's, one paragraph bios that just say stuff like dog dad or fluent in sarcasm. Chloe's profile stood out though because it had this really clean aesthetic and a bio that just said, I like people who look like they could fight a bear or bake a pie. Bonus points if you can do both. We started talking and she was super funny. Kind of dark humor, kind of weird, but in a way I liked. She sent voice notes instead of texts, which I thought was quirky at first until I realized she also never used punctuation and spoke like she was telling ghost stories even when talking about regular stuff like ordering Thai food. Still, I rolled with it. We planned to meet up for drinks at this bar that looks like a cabin that always smells like burnt cinnamon, which felt on brand for her whole spooky hipster vibe. I got there first, grabbed a booth in the back, and she showed up about 10 minutes later in a giant oversized hoodie, combat boots, and a necklace that looked like it had a real animal tooth on it. She gave me this long hug like we were old friends, and then immediately said, okay, I have to ask something kinda intense. I said sure, assuming it would be like, do you believe in ghosts? Or what's your biggest red flag? Or something in that chaotic first date zone. But no, she goes, Has anyone ever told you that you look like someone they know? I was like, yeah, I guess people say that sometimes. She pulls out her phone, taps through her photos, and then just shoves it in my face. It's a picture of this guy, kind of grainy, standing in what looks like a Bass Pro Shop, holding a fish and grinning like he's posing for a family Christmas card. I don't recognize him, obviously, but I do notice we kind of have the same eyebrows and nose. Maybe. She zooms in and says, "This is my brother Cole. You guys could be twins, honestly. It's freaky." I kind of laughed, not knowing what else to do. I thought she was just making a random comment, but she wasn't joking. She leaned back, sipped her drink, and said, "I've always had this thing for guys who look like him. Not in a weird way. Just comforting." And she stared at me like she wanted me to say, "Yeah, that makes total sense." But I was still processing the fact that I'd just been compared to her sibling like it was a Tinder badge of honor. I made some dumb joke like, should I be flattered or concerned? And she straight up said, "Flattered. I had great taste." Then she followed it up with, "He's married now, so I'm safe," which made absolutely zero sense, but she said it like it was reassuring. The date didn't get less weird from there. She kept asking me questions about my childhood, but not in a getting to know you way. It was like she was trying to line up my backstory with her brother's. She asked what age I learned to ride a bike, whether I preferred waffles or pancakes, what my favorite childhood injury was, like I was being interviewed for a role in a sibling impersonation contest. It was honestly kind of exhausting. Then she started talking about how Cole used to protect her from low vibration guys when she was in high school, and how she'd only ever felt truly safe around guys who had his calm alpha energy. I asked what that even meant, and she said, like when someone could kill a man with a rock but also sings along to sad songs in the car. I didn't know whether to say thanks or slowly slide out of the booth. At one point she asked if I had any tattoos. I said no, and she looked kind of disappointed. She goes, "Cole has this wolf tattoo on his ribs. It's like primal but vulnerable. You get along." I was about to say I'm sure he's great, but I'm not trying to be anyone's twin fantasy, when she just hit me with, "Would you ever change your hair? Like grow it out?" He used to have shoulder-length curls, and it really brought out his bone structure. That's when I knew I had to get out. Like I was trying to be polite up until then, but this was crossing into some territory I just did not sign up for. I told her I had to work early the next morning, which wasn't even a lie, and that it was getting late. She nodded and said, "Cool, yeah, don't want you tired around heavy machinery." I work in it. There is no machinery. As we stood outside the bar, she gave me this long look and said, "You have his same sad eyes. It's wild." Then she kissed me on the cheek and said, "Let me know if you ever want to do sibling energy cosplay." Totally platonic, but emotionally nourishing. I didn't even ask what that meant. I just smiled like someone trying not to spook a wild animal and said, "Yeah, totally. Take care." I had matched her later that night and blocked her number because I just couldn't. A few days later, I got a DM from a new account on Instagram with a message, "Still thinking about how your vibe mirrors Cole's. Hope you're thriving. Twin soul." No picture, no name, just that. To this day, every time someone tells me I look like someone they know, I get a little chill and mentally prepare myself to be compared to a sibling, a cousin, or some emotionally loaded ex. Never again. This one is burned into my brain like a weird fever dream that started kind of normal and then just spun totally off the rails before I could even blink. I met Ryan through a friend of a friend situation. He was at this little rooftop hang thing, standing off to the side, talking to a potted plant, and drinking something that looked like Gatorade in a wine glass. I figured he was a little odd, but kind of charming in that tech bro meets theater kid way. Funny, talkative, a little too to cryptocurrency, but whatever, I was bored and he had good teeth. He texted me a few days later asking if I wanted to hang out on Saturday. I asked what he had in mind, and he said, "I've got something fun and spontaneous planned. Just trust me." That was mistake number one. I should have asked more questions, but I was in a good mood and figured maybe it'd be something low-key like a museum or an arcade or, I don't know, a flea market. But when I asked where to meet him, he just sent me a pin to an office building downtown. I thought maybe it was a meetup spot where there was a cool rooftop bar inside. Again, should have asked more questions. I get there and he's waiting in the lobby in this very aggressively tucked-in shirt, wearing a lanyard that says Team Lead and holding a Starbucks cup with my name on it. I was thrown off right away. I asked, wait, are you working today? And he just goes, nah, I took care of that. Come on, I want you to see the real me. And before I can even react, he grabs my hand and starts leading me toward the elevators. We go up like 14 floors and step into this gray, depressing office with cubicles and fluorescent lights, and one of those break rooms that smells like burnt popcorn and sadness. I'm confused. I literally stop and say, are we allowed to be here? And he just says, trust me, this is gonna be good. He walks me straight over to this middle-aged woman sitting at a desk covered in cat-themed sticky notes and framed photos of her grandkids, and says, hey Melissa, this is my fiancé I was telling you about. I laugh awkwardly because I assume it's some weird joke or a bit, but she stands up and starts saying congratulations and asking when the wedding is. And Ryan just goes along with it, tells her it's in October, very intimate, and says he's been meaning to talk to HR about his time off. I'm standing there completely frozen. Like, does this man not realize we've known each other for maybe 2 weeks? I whisper, what the hell is going on? And he just gives me this little wink like I'm in on the con. I'm not. He drags me across the office to the HR department. I try to hang back and say I'll wait outside, but he literally grabs my hand and says, it'll be quick, I swear. Just need to get this squared away. The HR guy, some dude named Carl with a tired smile, looks up and goes, oh, you brought her. Congrats. And before I can say a word, Ryan launches into this whole speech about how he's been working overtime, how he's planning a life milestone, and how company culture should reflect personal growth. He pulls up his Outlook calendar and starts pointing to random weeks, saying stuff like, we'll probably need that one for the honeymoon, maybe this week too for venue visits. Meanwhile, I'm just standing there like an unwilling prop in a very unfunny sitcom. Carl looks at me and says, how'd he propose? And Ryan blurts out, at a waterfall in Iceland. I had never been to Iceland. I had never seen a waterfall with Ryan. I barely even knew his last name. After what felt like an eternity, Carl says he'll look into it and starts printing out some forms. I finally pull Ryan aside and whisper, why are you doing this? And he says, dead serious, because this is the only way they'll take me seriously about getting time off. Plus, you're convincing. You got the vibe. I did not have the vibe. I had the panic. That was the vibe. We leave the office and I practically run to the elevator. He's acting like he just nailed a performance, like he expects me to high-five him. I tell him that was completely out of pocket, and he just shrugs and says, you've got to play the game sometimes. The corporate world only respects commitment. I was like, yeah, real commitment, not made up wedding plans with a person you barely know. And he goes, well, I was gonna tell you after, but didn't you feel the energy in there? We made a great team. I told him we were done teaming anything, and he tried to soften it by saying, oh, hey, maybe I rushed the timeline. But hey, you got a free coffee. The worst part, on the way down, he tried to convince me to stop by the employee lounge with him so we could celebrate with a kombucha from the fridge. I just stared at him like, dude, I should be getting hazard pay. I left without saying anything else. Blocked him that night. Then 2 weeks later, I got a LinkedIn connection request from him with a message that said, no hard feelings. If you ever actually get engaged, let me know. I've got an HR guy who owes me a favor. I remember I met Ben at a bookstore, which sounds fake because no one actually meets people in bookstores anymore, but it happened. I was flipping through this random clearance rack, pretending I was going to read something intellectual, and he asked me if I believed that books could pick people instead of the other way around. Super weird opener, but I was in a good mood and he was cute in a disheveled, I forgot to shave kind of way. So I laughed and said, only the ones with dragons on the cover. He said that was poetic and bought me a coffee from the cafe like 5 minutes later. We sat and talked for an hour about music and weird dreams, and it actually felt kinda cool, like low-key charming. I liked that he wasn't trying too hard. He texted me later that day and said he felt like we vibrated on the same frequency, which should have been my first clue. But I was like, hey, maybe he's just artsy. He asked if I wanted to meet up later that week, and I said yeah. He said he had something meaningful planned. I assumed that meant a walk by the lake or, I don't know, a poetry open mic or something. Instead, he says, I want you to meet my son. Now I pause, because, that's not normal first date stuff. Meeting a kid is a big deal, and I told him straight up that felt kind of fast. He said, "Don't worry, it's not what you think. You'll understand when you meet him." And at this point, I'm like, what does that even mean? But I agree because I'm stupid curious when things start getting weird. We meet at this little outdoor park area near his neighborhood. It's got benches and those ugly metal sculptures that look like unfinished playground equipment. I show up and there's no kid in sight. I figure maybe they're on their way. But then Ben walks up with this guy, like a full-grown adult, easily mid-30s, kind of dressed like Ben beanie, weird patterned shirt, shoes with holes in them. Ben's got this huge smile on his face and says, "This is my son, Tobias." I laugh, thinking it's a joke, like how this is your friend, right? But Ben looks me dead in the face and says, "No, he's my son. Not biologically. Spiritually, he's my soul clone." Now I'm stuck there staring at this grown man like, do I just play along? Is this performance art? Am I being pranked? Tobias just nods like this is all very normal. I ask, trying to cue it together, "What do you mean by soul clone?" Ben says he's the version of me that emerged after my third ego death. We found each other during a group breathwork session and instantly knew we shared a consciousness in multiple past lives. I'm just standing there like a Sims character waiting for someone to give me a command. They both sit down on this bench and start talking to me like I'm being onboarded into their cult. Tobias, who, again, is supposedly Ben's son, starts telling me how he and Ben don't follow traditional time structures and age is a capitalist delusion. He says that relationships should be based on soul gravity, not physical timelines. I didn't even know what that meant, but they both nodded like it was deep. Ben starts explaining how he believes he doesn't need to have biological children because Tobias is already the purest expression of his inner self reincarnated in another form. I asked, "So, you just met him and decided he was your child?" And Ben says, "No, we remembered each other." And he goes on this rant about how hospitals block soul transfers and how the true womb is the astral bond. I genuinely thought about faking a phone call, but I was also just stuck, like I couldn't stop watching. I felt like I was watching a weird live performance of a podcast no one asked for. They start talking over each other about chakras and past lives, and something called emotional paternity. And Ben tells me, "You're lucky. Most people don't get to meet their partner's soul offspring this early." I told him I wasn't looking for a partner with kids or fully grown adult men pretending to be their clone sons. And he said, "That's your ego talking, not your spirit self." Then Tobias pulls out this little notebook and says he's been journaling about the possibility of shared romantic connections and how he wanted to respectfully explore a triangular bond. I had no idea how to even respond. I just sat there with the dumbest look on my face, trying to figure out how I ended up in a fake therapy session with two people who apparently thought I was about to become their cosmic stepmom. Ben reaches out and puts his hand on mine and says, "We could raise something beautiful together." And I pulled my hand back like it was on fire. I stood up and said, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna go." And Tobias just goes, "This reaction is rooted in third-dimensional fear," like I was being the unreasonable one. Ben looked sad, but also kind of proud, like he expected me to freak out, but respected that I stayed present in the discomfort. He said, "Maybe next lifetime," and Tobias bowed like I'd just been knighted. I walked back to my car in silence, then laughed so hard I couldn't even put my seatbelt on right away. Told my best friend the whole story, and she said, "Girl, you went on a date with a human nesting doll." Ben texted me the next day with a photo of the three of us. Yes, he had taken a selfie at the park without asking, and captioned it, "You used in our truest form. Miss your energy." Blocked. Instantly. And I don't go near bookstores anymore, just in case. I met Nemo on Hinge during one of those late night scroll sessions where you're not even really looking for anyone, just kind of swiping and judging bios until you pass out. I wasn't taking anything seriously. His profile caught my eye mostly because his name was actually listed as Nemo, like the fish. I assumed it was fake or maybe a middle name he liked better than whatever his real one was, but I guess he was committed to it. His profile was all over the place. One photo in front of a graffiti wall, one blurry one of him with what looked like 4 different ferrets, and one selfie where he was making a peace sign with a banana in his other hand. His prompts were chaotic. One said, "I'm overly competitive about guessing people's dreams." And another said, "Most spontaneous thing I've done." licked a tree to see if it was alive. So I knew I was walking into weird territory. I just didn't know how weird. He messaged me first, said something like, "Your face looks like you've had past lives," which, okay, not the worst opener I've gotten, but definitely up there on the strange scale. I told him his name made me laugh, and he said it's part of the brand. We talked for a few hours, mostly random stuff, like he asked me if I thought clouds were emotionally manipulative, and I said only when they hang low on purpose. He said we were clearly on the same frequency. I didn't even know what that meant, but it seemed harmless enough. A couple days later, he asked if I wanted to meet up in person. He said he had a favorite bubble tea place that had healing energy. Again, not the worst idea. I like bubble tea. It's public. Couldn't go that bad, right? I should have known better the second I got there. The place was this tiny little shop squeezed between a vape store and a dry cleaner. There was a big inflatable boba cup outside with a creepy cartoon face on it that was sun-faded and sort of leaning to one side like it had given up. Inside, it was all pastel colors and weird fake vines hanging from the ceiling. The kind of place that has a tips jar with glitter and a chalkboard wall with quotes like, "Sip into happiness." I showed up first. He walked in a few minutes later wearing overalls with only one strap buttoned and a sweatshirt underneath that said, "I feel like oat milk." He had a beanie on even though it was hot outside and mismatched socks you could see through the clear parts of his sandals. He gave me this big wave like we were old friends and said, "Your vibe's even squishier in person." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. We ordered drinks. He got something called Rainbow Taro Cloud, which looked like if unicorns had a seasonal flavor. I stuck with matcha because I wasn't trying to experiment with glittery beverages on a first date. While we waited, he kept making soft humming sounds. Not a song, just humming. And not casually either. Full eye contact the whole time like I was supposed to be joining in. We got our drinks and sat at this tiny wobbly table in the back. He kept leaning forward every time I said something like I was revealing secrets. At one point I mentioned I liked horror movies and he gasped like I told him I was a ghost. Then he started talking about how he thinks fear is a socially conditioned muscle, and that he sometimes sleeps in cemeteries to feel more alive. The whole time he kept glancing at my hands. Not like a little look either. He stared. Like long enough for me to start getting self-conscious about whether I had something on them. I was holding my cup with both hands, and I guess I paused mid-sentence to reach for a napkin or something, and that's what happened. This man leaned across the table and, without saying a word, slowly licked the back of my hand. Just one slow, weirdly delicate lick, like a cat trying to taste test me. I pulled my hand back like I'd just been burned. I just stared at him, blinking like maybe I'd imagined it. He looked at me totally calm and said I had to. Your energy was collecting there. I asked, "Did you just lick my hand?" And he goes, "Yeah, but not in a creepy way. I wasn't being weird. Your hand just looked emotionally hydrated." Emotionally hydrated. I didn't even know what to say. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because my brain was fully rebooting. I wiped my hand on a napkin, and he looked at me like I was being rude. He said, "That's the problem. People aren't comfortable being perceived on a cellular level." I told him, "You can't just go around licking people's hands, Nemo." And he said, "That wasn't a lick. That was an energy exchange. Like somehow that was supposed to make it less horrifying." Then he took a sip of his sparkly unicorn drink and said, "But if it made you uncomfortable, I respect that. Boundaries are yummy." I honestly considered getting up right then, but part of me was still trying to process if this was some weird social test or if he genuinely thought he was doing me a favor. He kept talking after that like nothing happened. Started telling me about this sensory deprivation tank he built in his friend's garage and how he uses candlelight therapy to reset his ego. I stopped listening after a while. I was just watching the exit and waiting for the right moment to leave without making it weird. I finally stood up and said I had somewhere to be. He didn't ask where. Just smiled and said, "Thanks for letting me taste your energy. I feel like we opened a portal." I said, "Sure," because honestly, what else do you say to that? As I walked away, he called out, "Text me if you ever feel energetically itchy again." I didn't look back. Blocked his number that night and threw away the napkin just in case it had mystical spit residue or whatever he believed in. That's the last time I go on a date without knowing a guy's actual last name. And I definitely don't trust anyone named after a Pixar fish anymore.